6, you can change.
Let me ask you.
That's my claim about sex this entire time.
Well, let's see if that's true. Let's see if that's true or not. Let's assume for a second that somebody goes down the exact same pathway that you did. I'm just going to ask one slight personal question. You don't have to answer it, of course, but just for the demonstration purposes, have you taken HRT?
Yes.
Okay, good. So assuming that somebody has the exact same story that you do, however, does not color their hair purple and does not grow it out, right? Or let's just say that they do, in fact, do this, okay? But they say that they're not a woman. Would you classify them as one?
As a woman? Are we talking about woman or are we talking about female?
Would you classify them as a woman?
So woman is a social category. I think we would have to examine their lived social experience to classify them as a woman.
So one more time, I'm going to ask this, right? Because it's very important.
Andrew Wilson completely dominates this nominal Naomi. Nominal Naomi is a trans person and a trans activist who wants to try their hand at arguing the losing matter of if men can identify as women and on transgenderism. But of course, Andrew Wilson, with the common sense on his side, just isn't having it and owns them with the facts and the logic. Let's see how this debate between Andrew Wilson and nominal Naomi goes down.
Faceted things. What is the definition of a woman in your purview?
Would you like a definition?
I would like you to give me your definition, or what
sure,
you
I can certainly give you a definition of woman, but I want to be clear that I don't believe that there is like one end-all be-all definition for any term, let alone woman. But because I recognize woman more so under a sociological framework, I would say that a woman is an individual who's assigned feminine roles and expectations by their society based on perceived femininity, femaleness, and/or stated identity.
So it's just a perception? There's nothing foundational about it?
No, it's based on a lived social experience.
Well, it sounds like it's an empty label because you're not telling me what it actually is.
I told you it's based on a lived social experience.
Yeah,
of
that
having
doesn't mean anything.
Feminine roles and expectations assigned to you by society.
What is the actual definition according to Naomi? If I
just provided it to you.
If I declared that I was a woman, would I be one?
I don't think so.
Why?
That is not your sincere identity.
But assuming that
also that's not your lived social experience.
I hate it when these trans people or trans activists, how they always like go by like, if I were to say, well, what if I identify as a woman? They would say, well, no, I don't think you're being sincere. Like they always fall onto the I don't think you're being sincere. However, they tell us that we should treat all trans people, like regardless if they're really trans or not, as their preferred identity. So here's the thing, like, yes, nominal Naomi here might know that Andrew Wilson is not actually a trans person because, you know, they probably watch his debates and stuff like that in videos. But if Andrew Wilson was out on the street with a wig and a dress on and said he's a woman, you know, Naomi wouldn't know if they were really trans or not. They wouldn't know. So I hate it when they just go, well, I know you're not being sincere about it. It's like, yeah, okay, but what about the random person on the street? How do you know if they're sincere or not?
So assuming that I took it as my lived identity, do you need to have the social experience of being a woman in order to be one?
Are you asking descriptively or prescriptively?
I'm asking you.
Well, I think that descriptively, if we're recognizing woman as a lived social experience, then that would encompass somebody who lives that social role. But if we're talking about how I think that people should be prescriptively treated, then I would want to treat people based off of their sincere identity.
I'm asking
that is
you
completely an answer to your question.
That they're a woman. If a man claims that they're a woman, a biological male claims that they're a woman, what makes them not one?
What do you mean?
I don't know how else I can possibly frame that better, but I'll try. If a person says, Naomi, I have all the same characteristics that you do, but I'm not a woman, are they a woman?
If we're talking descriptively, if their lived social experience is that of a woman, descriptively, they would be a woman.
So would you misgender them?
No, because I interact with people based off of my prescriptive beliefs.
Okay, so anybody who says they're a woman, you're going to consider them to be one.
If it's a sincere identity, then prescriptively, yeah.
Well, how would you know if it's sincere or not? You just have to take them at their word.
I think that you can typically do this based off of a vibe check. For example, when Steven Crowder dressed up as a woman and said that he was a woman, I didn't believe him.
Wait,
I think that a trans woman who sincerely believes that, you know, they are a woman, they want to be a woman, It's pretty easy to tell based on the vibe
Naomi,
check.
you just told me that based on the vibe, if you feel like they aren't, it's okay to misgender them.
If someone like Steven Crowder is pretending to be a trans woman, I think it's okay to misgender him.
Okay, but what if you don't know? What if they're claiming that they are? You don't know for sure, but the vibe you get is that they're not. Is it okay to misgender them?
I mean, I default to being pretty lenient with people, but I think that based on the vibe check, it's pretty easy to tell when someone is being, very, very dishonest.
Well, how do you know? They could be lying. Like, for instance, if you tell me, Naomi, if you said to me, Andrew, I'm a woman, and I said, you're lying to me, the vibe that I get is that you're not. Why am I wrong? Because
Why are you wrong?
It's
because my lived social experience is that of a woman.
Experience, but you could be lying, right?
Sure, people can lie about their lived social experience.
So then why ought I say something that I think is not true?
I mean, you can say whatever you want to believe. I'm simply arguing for what I believe and what I believe creates the most utility in these situations.
But Naomi, I know what is. I know that in the realm of what is, I can do whatever I want. I'm asking you, why ought I do this thing?
Why ought you do
Why
what?
ought I go ahead and do this thing where you claim that I need to go out of my way to call somebody based on the vibe, whatever I want, even if what if the vibe I'm getting is that they're
Wait,
lying?
I never said that you have to do this. I'm
Well,
explaining why
no.
I do this.
Well, regardless, it's still an ought. Don't you think people ought not misgender other people?
Yes, I think that people ought to treat people based off of the gender role that they would like to live in.
What if your vibe is that they're lying? Is it okay to misgender them?
If it's somebody that it seems that they are very much being dishonest, yeah.
Well, I don't know what that means, though. That's all subjective.
You don't know what vibe checks are? I think there's lots of things that we vibe check about.
Freaking vibe checks. It's so ridiculous because this person tries to sound smart, tries to rely on studies and science, but then they go, oh, but my vibe checks. What does that even mean, vibe checks? Do you want a scanner over them and their vibes check out? They're being sincere. You can't always tell if a person's lying. There are some people that are really good liars. So spare me this whole vibe check nonsense. It's ridiculous.
Well, wait a second. If any human being then, based on the criteria of conservative Christian, thinks that a transgendered woman is lying about being a woman, they should then misgender them because their vibe is that they're lying, Naomi.
I don't think that they think the trans woman is lying. I think they disagree with the trans woman, which is not the same thing as thinking that the trans woman is lying.
Well, they think they're lying about being women.
Wait. Is it a lie if the conservative person and the trans woman has a different perceptive of what gender means, and the trans woman sincerely believes that she is a woman? Is that a lie, or is that just a different perspective?
It's a lie if, from the conservatives' perspective, they believe
that's not a lie at all. That's a difference of perspective.
The Christian person believes that what you're doing. Well, okay, lies are based often on perspective. They can be malicious. This is true, but they're based often on perspective. The conservative wouldn't be lying then by misgendering you, would they?
Wait, what do you think a lie is? I think that a lie is a false statement.
I'm not going to endlessly define everything under the sun with you. If you want me to pull up a definition of lie, I will, but it's acting in a way which is dishonest, right?
Yes, and a trans woman is not acting dishonest by claiming that she's a woman. Just because she has a different definition of woman, that doesn't mean she's acting dishonest.
How do we detect what's a lie?
How do you detect what's a lie? Well, I think there are lots of things that it's kind of hard to detect what's a lie, and we kind of just take people on their word or based on a vibe check. I mean, for example, somebody could lie to you about what their name is, but we kind of just take people at face value on that.
Yeah, of course. If someone tells you their name is Rick, but their name's actually Scott, you're not going to know that. You're just going to take them at their word until there's evidence that comes out that his name's not actually Rick. I mean, obviously, you can't see what a person's real name is. It's not tattooed on their face. So yeah, if someone comes up to you and goes, "Oh yeah, my name's Rick." Yeah, of course you're going to take them at face value, because why not? First of all, people don't usually lie about their name. So it's really weird if someone does lie about their name. And two, the only way that you would know that this person isn't really named Rick is if you meet someone from their past that says their name's actually Scott, or you run into some kind of documentation like their ID or something that says that their name's actually Scott.
Yeah, but if somebody came up to you and they had a scar across their face and they said, "I have no scar on my face," is it okay to say that you're lying?
Well, if it's based on something that is physically observable, then perhaps they are lying.
If it's based on something that's physically observable that you can see and from your perspective is not true, you're not actually lying then by misgendering somebody,
gender is not something that's just like purely physical.
Really?
Yes.
There's a metaphysical aspect to it? What would that be?
I would say that gender is more so sociological in nature.
So it's a social construction, that's true, but every manifestation that you can point to of it would be physical, correct?
I guess, like, are things like behaviors physical?
The way that they manifest are physical, yeah.
I would certainly think that, like, gendered expression, there would be physical manifestations of it.
Yes, it's all physical. We've established this. So I don't know what you're talking about. You essentially have just told me that if a person believes that the other person is lying in regards to gender, that it's perfectly okay for you to misgender them. This is your stance you just took, Naomi.
I think that if it's, like, very clear that somebody is being dishonest, you don't have to, you know, follow along with that. But trans people aren't being, you know, dishonest by claiming to be a certain gender.
Okay, well, you claim this, but from my perspective, they are. What's wrong with me saying that you're lying and then misgendering you?
So a lie requires intent. This is something that you've said yourself.
Yeah, but I'm not lying about it.
Wait, but you said that the trans person is lying. The trans person had no intent of being dishonest.
No, the intent
You
works
yourself
on both
have said that
levels.
lies require intent, but there is no intent of dishonesty when a trans woman claims to be a woman.
The conservative also isn't lying to you by misgendering you, is he?
I never said that they were lying.
Right, they're not lying. So the thing is that in order to be completely honest, a conservative must misgender.
Boom. Completely silenced this nominal Naomi. Here's the thing. They're saying lying requires intent. But how do you know which one's intentionally lying? If you have two transgender people come into the room, one is someone that actually believes that they're the opposite gender in their brain, and then the other person doesn't really believe they're their opposite gender. They just want to, I don't know, be a creep or something like that, or fulfill their own fetishes or whatever they got going on. How do you know which one's intentionally lying? Is that where your vibe check comes in?
If that's what they believe, like
yeah, because that's the vibe.
I'm not saying like they have to like gender a trans person as the trans person would.
Right. So because that would be a lie and that would be bad and that would be against the vibe. So as we can see, ladies and gentlemen, just so you know out in the audience, Naomi made a phenomenal case for why anybody who doesn't believe that a trans woman is a woman, it's okay to misgender them, because Naomi wouldn't want you to lie after all. Right, Naomi?
Well, hold up. I think that there is a loss of utility in doing so. Now, people can, you know, for whatever their intentions are, they can still do things that have bad outcomes. So, for example, misgendering a trans person, it has negative outcomes. That's a bad thing.
Doesn't lying have negative outcomes?
It certainly can.
Yeah. So how do we determine whether the lying has a worse negative outcome than the negative outcome on your utilitarian chart of how the person feels who is doing the lying?
Wait, what is the negative outcome for like a conservative to like gender a trans person correctly? How is that to violate your religion? I just told you. You just expressed that if, from the perspective of the Christian, they believe that they're lying by giving you a gender that they don't believe is true, that actually correlates with the sex in which you're trying to express, they would be lying. That's against their core value. There's no utility in it for them whatsoever. In fact, it's counter-utils. Negative utils. Wait. Just because like a religious person believes something doesn't necessarily mean that like that is a moral action to do. Just because a transgender person believes something doesn't necessarily mean it's a moral action either. Right, which is why we should look at objective outcomes, such as the mental health and overall well-being of trans people. Why should we look at objective outcomes? Wait, stop. And the affirmation of trans people improves those outcomes. You smuggled this in. The objective outcome, right? How do we know that this is the objective outcome, that it's more harm for you to tell the entire swath of the American public, some 270 million who self-identify as Christian, that it's better for them to lie from their perspective,
than it is for you to be lied to because you think the outcomes are more negative.
There is no harm in gendering a trans person correctly, and we have research studies, medical studies, which show that trans people's mental health outcomes are better when they are socially affirmed in their gender, like in the gender they wish to be.
Well, that's nice for them, but what about the person doing the gendering? Where's the study showing what it does to the person's psychology when they're forced into a situation of having to lie to make you feel better?
What about the psychology of a person that says, okay, yes, I'm gonna, even though I know this person entering the women's bathroom is a man, and I see that they're a man, what does it do to a person's psyche if they know that it's a man and they now have to allow them into the women's restroom where they're potentially putting women and young girls in danger? What do you think that does to their psyche, that they have to therefore lie to themselves and convince themselves and gaslight themselves that no, this is actually a woman, and allow them into a woman's restroom where they're putting people in danger? Or when they allow a man in women's sports where, again, they are putting women in danger? What do you think it does to their psyche? Where's the studies on that? There are none, because this person's going to say, well, there's no studies on this. Well, yeah, they're not doing studies on them, but they should. They probably should do studies, don't you think?
I don't think that we have necessarily like studies. I don't think we have any evidence which shows that like Christians are harmed by gendering a trans person correctly.
You haven't.
So I think we should default to analyzing that as neutral. Unless you can present evidence that it's harmful, we should default to analyzing that as neutral.
Why there's no evidence? There's no evidence because nobody will fund what it does psychologically to a population to be forced to lie. And
are you really claiming to be victimized by like calling a trans woman she? Like that victimizes you?
You said earlier that based on the vibe, that a woman's not just anybody who says they're a woman, because if that were true, then just based on the vibe, you can say, no, that's not true, right? You said that that's totally appropriate, meaning from the person's perspective, the individual's perspective, it's okay for you, if you believe that you're lying, to not lie, right?
So I'm talking about like trying to figure out people who are being disingenuous. A trans person is not being disingenuous. Now,
yes, they are.
You are claiming that like there is a harm in having or in like gendering a trans person correctly.
Yes,
how are you correct. The victim in gendering a trans person correctly?
Because you're forcing me to lie.
I'm not forcing you to lie.
Yeah, and not only that, it's emotional hostage taking, because transgenders are saying either lie to us or we'll kill ourselves.
I never said that.
Well, but when we talk about the data that you're about to get into for why it's objectively better to not misgender trans people, the number one thing you're going to bring up is that they may consider self-suicide if we don't gender them correctly. Correct?
So just because like if you are going to is it correct that trans people commit suicide at like greater rates when they are not socially affirmed?
I'll just restate it really simply. Is it not correct that you're about to tell me that the number one reason that we need to use the proper pronouns is because if we don't, transgender people are going to kill themselves? Isn't that true? Isn't that really what you're going to tell me next?
I don't think that's like necessarily like the main or only reason. I think that just like doing things that lead to, you know, better, more accepting, more welcoming, more happy, healthy societies in general is a good thing, such as gendering trans people correctly.
Because if we don't gender trans people correctly, what's the consequence, Naomi?
Worsened mental health and all the things that are associated with that.
Which leads to...
It can lead to mental health disorders. It can lead to suicide. There are lots of things that it can lead to.
Right? Okay,
there are lots of negative outcomes it can lead to. Right, don't you want to prevent those negative outcomes?
Well, perhaps. It depends on what we mean when we're saying negative outcomes. When I'm asking specifically here...
Do you want to like prevent trans people from committing suicide?
I want to know why you think that a whole swath of the population that may not believe this should do it anyway, other than the fact that you're holding us emotionally hostage, literally at the barrel of a gun to your own heads to say, if you do not do this, we are going to collectively start killing ourselves.
I never said that. I have never used any language
then why ought we
I have never used any language that's emotionally hostage-taking. I'm simply stating we can create better social outcomes by socially affirming trans people. That is just a fact. I'm just stating facts here.
What social outcomes do you want to see? You
I
want
want
to
to
see the
see improved mental health.
suicidality?
I want to see improved well-being.
Right. Why do you want to see those things? Because if trans suffer from a worse mental health status, what ends up happening? Their suicidality rate goes through the roof, right? This is the number one critique, is it not?
That is certainly one thing that happens, but also socially affirming trans
These people like Naomi here, they believe that if you don't affirm someone's chosen gender, that they will unalive themselves. They know that that is a big reason why they push this stuff, because they don't want trans people unaliving themselves. I don't know why they just don't be honest and be like, yes, that is the number one reason. But when they're confronted and have their feet held to the fire, they try to deny it and say, no, that's one reason, but and it's like, just be honest and just say, yes, it's because we don't want trans people to unalive themselves. You know, which, by the way, if you were to misgender me and call me a woman, like, it would be annoying, but I wouldn't want to unalive myself. So, I mean, haven't these people ever thought that there might be something deeper going on? I mean, obviously, on the face of it, if you believe you're the opposite gender, obviously you could already tell there's something deeper going on. But if the only way is you have to affirm them or else they're going to do something bad to themselves, that's already unhealthy. And shouldn't we be looking to other solutions than just affirming everything that they want?
people leads to good social outcomes for everyone. When trans people are more included in society, when they're more able to self-actualize, they can become happy, healthy members of society that are more productive, and that helps us all. I think you should be interested in this too. If you want a happy, healthy, productive society, you know, building a diverse and accepting society is going to help us all, and that would include the social affirmation of trans people.
Well, Naomi, let's dive into that and see if that's true, right? When you say that we should socially affirm trans people's identity because it's good for the trans people, why do I, a Christian conservative, believes I'm lying by calling you something I know for sure, at least from my perspective, is a lie? Why is that good for all of society, considering that you're outnumbered thousands to one?
Because there is no harm in you gendering a trans person as they wish. Meanwhile, we have demonstrable benefits of gendering a trans person as they wish.
Naomi, is lying harmful?
It certainly can be.
Okay, it can be. And if you were a person who was a Christian, one of the foundations of your religion was that you were not allowed to lie, would it be harmful for you then to do something that was contrary to your own religious values?
It can be.
Would it be?
I don't think that I can make a blanket statement there.
You don't think that a person who lived their life contrary to their own values, that wouldn't be harmful?
I think that it certainly can be, but I think that people have justifications for things where they might have conflicting values, such as, I think that you in general would believe that reducing the amounts of people that kill themselves is a good thing. You also believe that lying is a bad thing. You have some conflicting beliefs there. So, I mean, there's some things to weigh.
So you want me to lie so that trans people won't kill themselves, right?
I don't think it's a lie.
But that's what you want. Why not just admit that that's what...
So notice how they switch it up, because he confronts Naomi and says, so you want us to lie so they don't do this? And Naomi goes, well, I don't think it's a lie. So notice how they had to move the goalpost now, and now say, well, I don't think it's a lie, to justify this action because they know it's wrong. So now they have to say, well, I don't think it's a lie. Well, yeah, if you're a regular person and you have to identify a trans person as something different that you know that they're not, then it is a lie by default.
That's what you want. It's a lie from my perspective. I'm not saying that you're lying. Listen, Naomi, I want to be ultimately charitable here. I'm not claiming that you yourself are trying to lie to me. I don't believe that that's true. Okay. From my perspective, though, regardless of what you believe, I think you're lying. Therefore, it's contrary to my religious belief structure, which is very harmful to me. So why should I affirm the identity unless it's to somehow stop you from doing self-harm? You're asking me to do something against my moral values in order to stop you from self-harming. How is that justification? How is that good for society?
How is it good for society? Because it leads to better social outcomes.
How do you know?
Because we have studies on this. We
don't have any studies on how studies on trans people lie.
Okay, well, if we don't have any evidence for your claim, I think we have to default to it being utilitarian,
No,
neutral.
we don't. First of all, that's not how science works. Science doesn't only
If you don't have
default
evidence that it's
to any
actually like harmful to
conflicting-
you, I don't think you can claim that it's harmful to you.
Well, first of all, wait a second. I have no evidence harm. I'm telling you that you're asking me personally to do something that conflicts with my own moral values. That would be harmful to me, yeah?
I think that you have moral values that are at conflict there because you also have a moral value for social good, don't you?
It depends on what the social good is.
Say like people in general having better mental health and like being more so able to self-actualize.
Not necessarily. It depends.
You don't think that people should have better health? You don't think that we
Depends on
should take
specific
actions that
criteria.
give people better mental health on
No,
average?
like for instance, if you were to say, should a person take a magic pill that makes them live for 300 years? I would tell you no.
I'm talking about mental health.
Okay, but let's say you said that a person could take a pill. Like I said, it's the criteria that matters. You have to be very specific here. I'm giving you something that is now. It is right this second. I'm telling you that Christian conservatives don't want to gender trans people based on the pronouns of their preference because we think we're lying. And so this causes actual harm to us. On the scale, you say, but the only empirical evidence that I can demonstrate is a harm to ourselves. That's nice, right? But there is
I don't think you can empirically demonstrate a harm to yourself.
If I were Andrew, I would bring up the whole, well, yes, lying can lead to harm, because if I lie to myself and tell myself, oh, that man dressed like a woman is entering the woman's bathroom, and then it turns out later on some girl got hurt in that bathroom by that man dressed like a woman, well, yeah, because I lied to myself and I lied to other people, that has led to harm. So I would bring up that point that, yes, actual tangible harm does come out of this lying.
I just told you that you're asking me to lie, and that's harmful.
That's
to
not
me.
empirical.
That's harmful
That's
to my
entirely
psychological
subjective.
health. What?
That's entirely
How is
that's not empirical. You don't have any
How
numbers.
is it subjective?
You're saying it hurts my feelings.
Wait,
Like, that's just entirely
That's
subjective.
all you're saying.
No,
That's
no,
all you're
I'm saying we have objective data which shows that trans people live better lives
Oh, you're so
when
full
they
of
are
shit.
when they are socially affirmed.
No, the objective data that you're going to say is that these amount of people were polled and it hurt their feelings. Isn't that true?
No, we also have objective data on things like educational outcomes, things like economic outcomes. Trans people who are socially
because their
affirmed
feelings are no
do
longer
better in society. They
Because
get
their
better
feelings are no
jobs.
longer hurt.
They acquire higher education. We can actually point to objective outcomes that have been studied
But why?
here. But you
But
can't
why?
point to any objective outcomes.
Yes, I can. I've already done this multiple times. I'm saying
No,
to
you just pointed to your subjective
you
feelings.
you have logically stated this multiple times already, that a person who has the religious values that I have, that of saying something that's perceived as a lie from their perspective would probably be harmful to them.
I said it can be.
Yeah, it can be, and
I
I'm
didn't say
demonstrating
probably.
to you that.
I said it can be.
Okay, so let me ask you this. Do you think that Christians, conservative fundamentalist Christians, why do you think that they don't want to label transgender people by their pronouns?
Because it hurts their feelings.
So it hurts them?
I think their poor fifis are in danger. I think it's I think it's snowflakery, TBH.
So it hurts.
So Naomi attacks us and says it's because it hurts our fifis and that we're being snowflakes. Again, more manipulative behavior, like, oh no, it's because we're getting our feelings hurt and that's why we don't do this. Oh, what are you, a snowflake? Is that why you don't want to properly gender somebody? Even though literally their whole thing is if you don't gender them the way they want to be gendered, they unalive themselves. So we're the snowflakes? Make it make sense.
So it hurts them.
I think it's just about their feelings.
So, okay, and what is it for trans people if it's not about feelings?
It's about objective outcomes, which we have measured in like the
based on how
literature.
they feel. It's all based on how they
no,
feel.
No, not just based on feelings, based on mental health, based off of
So
socioeconomic attainment.
Naomi, you're so full of shit. If a person does better,
socioeconomic attainment is different than feelings.
The affirmations that are happening for trans people are so that they feel better, so that they can do all the education and blah blah blah. Isn't that true?
What'd you say?
I said specifically, it's their feelings that lead to those outcomes, right? It's based 100% on how they feel, and that's what's actually leading to those better outcomes.
Based 100% on how they feel?
It's 100% based on how they feel. Otherwise, why would the affirmations matter to them?
How can you say it's 100% based on how they feel?
It can't be based on anything else.
I think that it certainly can be based off of things like social cohesion. That's not necessarily a feeling.
So, of course it's a feeling. What else is it?
No, actually having greater connections is not just a feeling.
That's
like
a feeling.
if you're better able to network, that's not necessarily just a feeling. Like that's something where it's something you've actually achieved.
What's the purpose of it? The purpose of it is how you feel. All of the affirmation is based around how you feel. All affirmations are based around feeling. You say that this does harm to Christians because it hurts their feelings. I'm saying the same argument. The only thing that it does harm to you on is that it hurts your feelings. But there's far more of us whose feelings get hurt. We know this because I can demonstrate to you how many Christians there are, fundamentalists in this nation. A lot more feelings get hurt on this side.
So what are like the negative outcomes of that? What are the objective negative outcomes of that?
You're about to tell me, Naomi, that the negative outcomes, if we don't do what you say, is that trans people are going to kill themselves, just so you know.
That is perhaps,
you're trying to hold us emotionally hostage.
One negative outcome. I'm not holding you hostage. I'm just stating that that's something that happens when trans people are not socially affirmed at higher rates.
For us is that we feel like we're strangers in our own nation and religion. We feel like people are allowed to not only broadly lie.
I asked for objective outcomes. Do you have any?
The objective outcomes is that our mental health suffers from having to lie.
What's your source on that?
You're my source on it, Naomi.
I asked for objective outcomes.
You already told me.
And you just pointed to your feelings. You don't have objective outcomes.
Naomi, why again do fundamentalist Christians not want to use proper pronouns?
Because they're snowflakes.
Because it hurts their feelings?
Yeah, because it hurts their feelings.
Source? Give me the source, Naomi. Give me the source.
Well, that's talking about a subjective thing.
No, give me the source, Naomi. Give me the source that it hurts their feelings right now. Do it.
So this is brilliant by Andrew, completely turning it around on Naomi here, using Naomi's own words against them. What do you guys think about this so far? Sound off in the comment section below. Smash that like button if you are enjoying this. If you think Andrew Wilson is completely dominating here, let's continue.
So I asked you for something objective. I didn't want to just talk about.
Objective.
Do you want me to give you sources about how socially affirming trans people gives them objectively better outcomes? Yeah, because I can do that, but you can't give me any. I asked for sources on objective data,
I just asked
not
you for
sources on subjective data.
I asked you for a source for a claim.
Andrew, one sec. I never asked you for a source on subjective data. I asked you for a source on objective data.
It is subjective data.
You claimed that it was objective, but you didn't have any data.
It's not objective. Your source is based 100% around polling of how people feel.
That's not true.
And then based on those feelings, you get
that's not true.
Outcome.
I also have studies that are based off of economic outcomes, educational attainment.
Which all lead back to how they feel.
That's not done based off of a poll of people's feelings.
Back to the feelings.
You can collect this from demographic data. That's not based off of a poll. You said it was based on. You said it was based solely on a poll, but that's just not true.
Yes,
we can actually assess the objective outcomes of trans people, and they improve when they're socially affirmed.
Well, let's find out if this is true or if you're lying to me again. Okay, so here we'll do it this way. How would we know if those objective things like the economic outcomes and the mental health outcomes were true if you hadn't done a poll asking the person if the affirmations were the things that helped them get those results? Can you explain that to me real quick?
So you don't need to ask them what gave you the results. You simply ask them like information about their level of social affirmation, and then independently you assess objective outcomes.
Done. So
you correlate the social affirmation with the objective outcomes, which is something I can do that you can't.
So let me help you out here. Here's what you just said. To everybody listening, here's what Naomi just said. Naomi just said, you can call them and ask them if the affirmations which directly posited in their life a type of feeling contributed to this outcome.
That's not what they do.
That's what you just said.
That is not what they do, and that's not what I said.
Then what's an affirmation?
What they ask people is about the level of social affirmation that they experience in their gender identity.
So
Things
what's an
like
affirmation?
things like, are their parents supportive? Things like, do they have friends and family that are supportive of their gender identity?
Feelings.
They ask them things like that, and then
All feelings.
independently they use demographic data about things like economic attainment, educational attainment, and you correlate their level of social attainment with their objective outcomes. This is something that I can do that you can't. You don't have any studies.
But I don't need to.
What
it has no bearing on my
Christians'
argument.
level of misgendering trans people and how that ends up in educational attainment, economic attainment. You don't have any studies on that.
Yeah, I do. Well, I don't. Well, here's the thing. One, I do, and we'll pull up studies in just a second when I move on to my next argument. As this one you're getting just destroyed on, but I'm going to finish this up because you need to explain this. It makes no sense to me. You claim that we can do an objective analysis after they already feel good to show that the outcomes were good. Okay, nobody's disputing that. When I ask you, how do you know, or why is it that you think that Christians don't want to use the pronouns? You say because it hurts their feelings. But when I ask you for a study on that, you say there isn't one. Of course there's not one. Nobody's bothered to do any of the research on it. But you yourself are my source because you believe that that's the truth, and so do I. And that what we're really talking about here is hurt feelings across the board. Your feelings get hurt, which leads to worse outcomes for you in life. But you want to assume to the rest of the audience that hurting the feelings of hundreds of millions of people, no bearing whatsoever. Who cares?
You how hurt, how victimized are you by gendering a trans person as they wish?
You're forcing religious people to lie, Naomi. It is
not a lie at all.
Yeah, you're doing it at the gunpoint of self-harm too, because trans people are saying collectively.
It is not a lie at all.
Yeah, well, if we don't affirm what they're saying, is suicidality going to raise?
If we don't affirm the gender identities of
trans identity,
yeah. That does have the outcome of increasing their rates of suicide. That is true.
So it's emotional hostage taking. You're saying have to do it.
I have never held you.
It's so annoying when Naomi says, "Well, I never held you emotionally hostage." Well, yeah, you are. You all are. All you guys are that push this ideology. You guys are all holding us emotionally hostage. You guys could deny it all you want, but that's exactly what's going on here. If you're telling people, "Hey, if you don't do this, these people are going to unalive themselves," what else is that?
Do you think
I have never said you I have never said you need to do this because otherwise we're going to kill ourselves. What I said is you should do things that lead to better social outcomes, such as improving the mental health of trans people. That's my claim. You should do things that lead to better social outcomes.
Lead to better social outcomes for Christians, which is allowing us to say the gender that we believe is not a lie.
What is the better social outcome?
No, the social outcome there is that we're not lying, and so therefore our mental health is greatly increased.
Yeah, I don't think it's a lie to gender a trans person the way they wish.
I think it's, well, then why do Christians want to misgender?
I think they don't understand that.
No, you said it's because they had hurt feelings. Don't change the argument now. I thought it was hurt feelings 5 seconds ago, Naomi. Now it's something different?
I think that it can be both. I think that, ignorance can breed those feelings.
Okay, so if I'm ignorant on this, are you saying that I don't know the difference between gender and sex?
I think that for a lot of people that misgender trans people, they don't.
So if they were to misgender you, they're not lying, are they? If they don't know the difference?
If they, I guess I would certainly agree that lies require intent, but I don't think, I can come up with a blanket statement of, lying is harmful or, lying is good. I think that lying is kind of morally ambiguous, and it depends on the situation. But what matters the most here is objective. What matters the most here is objective social outcomes.
Why does that matter the most? We don't know what the objective social outcome could possibly be on subjecting hundreds of millions of people to having to lie. We've never studied it. We can't study it, but you yourself know that there's a negative outcome because you've stated it now emphatically. I don't know how many times. That the reason that Christians don't want to gender you correctly is based solely on the fact that it hurts their feelings. That's a negative outcome for hundreds of millions on the util scale, Naomi.
So I don't think that I don't think that it's a lie to gender a trans person correctly, though.
Okay, but from their perspective, they're lying.
I think that
that's what matters.
I think that we can educate them on why that's not a lie. and
Well,
create
I
the
think
best.
they can educate you.
We can create the
too.
best social outcome if we can.
We could educate you on why that's not a lie. In other words, we could brainwash you into thinking that it's not a lie. And yeah, Andrew's right. Well, why can't we just educate them into thinking that they're not the opposite gender? Why is that bad?
Convince them that it's not a lie.
Yeah, but why can't they educate you on why it is a lie?
So we know that that leads to worse social outcomes.
Right, that's right. And the maximum
Objective
of that
social
negatives, yeah, right. The social outcome being, and this all, by the way, is emotional hostage taking, not just the suicidality, all of it. If you're saying it's going to lead to worse social outcomes, the whole thing is hostage taking. If it doesn't provide you with a better education, doesn't help you do this, doesn't help you achieve this goal, doesn't help you achieve that goal, it's all emotional hostage taking across the board.
So
you're
like,
literally saying
so like
we
how
need
many,
to
wait,
make sure that we lie to you so that you have better outcomes. That's emotional
so
hostage
it's not a lie, and I've never said you need to do this. I'm saying it's a good thing to do this. Now, I guess like how many? Okay,
Well, wait,
so
wait,
let's
back
kind of
up.
compare
Ought we do it?
let's kind of
Wait,
compare
ought
like
we
what
do
the
it?
what the actual social outcomes are.
Okay, great.
How many
But
Christians?
first,
How many Christians
ought
kill
we do
themselves
this?
because they like gender a trans person correctly?
Who knows? It's never been studied. Ought we do this? Ought we use proper pronouns? Do you think that's an ought? Ought we do that?
Yeah, I think that's a not.
Well, then you are saying it. So don't lie and say you're not.
I'm not saying need. You're saying you're conflating ought with need.
So what should happen if all fundamentalist Christians collectively tomorrow across the board decided that they were not going to adhere to gender pronouns, right? Should there be consequences for that, Naomi?
Should there be consequences?
Yeah.
I think that perhaps like trying to educate them better. Yeah, I think that's
No,
what I would try
that's
to
not
do
what
to
I asked. I
approach
asked if
that
there
situation.
should there be consequences? Should they get fired, for instance, from their job? Even though they have a conflict.
I think that misgendering people can certainly constitute like workplace harassment.
Right. So there has to be consequences. So this is an ought claim. You want actual consequences to happen to people if they don't follow along with the we must gender you a certain way. So if that's true, then this is an ought claim, and you are saying we need to do it or else.
I mean, like I think that in the workplace harassment case, like you can create a hostile work environment by like vehemently misgendering people, and that just makes the office worse for everyone.
Yeah, but should there be a law that says that a person must do this?
A law that a person like must do this? I don't think so.
That a person must gender correctly inside the workplace.
I think this is probably better handled by like HR boards, because like dealing with hostile work environments
so it's not
pretty
discrimination.
Complicated.
Is it discrimination to do? What if I don't want to hire you?
Is it discrimination to do what?
Yeah, what if I don't want to hire you and I say I don't want to hire you based on the fact that you have these pronoun restrictions?
You don't want to hire someone because they're trans?
Because they have pronoun restrictions and they conflict.
I mean, everybody has pronouns.
And they conflict with my faith.
So you want to like be able to not hire someone who has a certain gender identity because of like your religion?
No, I want to make sure that I don't have the requirement isn't that I have to lie to them from my perspective.
I think you might get into the territory of violating the Civil Rights Act if you were to do that.
And what's the civil right?
Like the civil right for people to be free from discrimination.
Well, what's discriminatory about it if there's no lie? At least from the person's perspective.
Discrimination doesn't have to be like a lie.
Well, I think that discrimination preferences are mostly based around the fact that they're preconceived notions which are often wrong and lies.
No. Discrimination is denying somebody access to an institution based off of like a protected attribute, such as gender identity, for example.
And why?
That's
and
discrimination. That has nothing to do with lying.
But those people.
Wait. Discrimination has nothing to do with a lie.
Oh no, it does. What do people mostly discriminate along the lines of?
Race, gender,
stereotypes, right?
That's perhaps one thing that people discriminate along the lines of.
Probably the primary thing, right? They discriminate based along stereotypical lines. Wouldn't you agree?
That is one way in which like discrimination happens.
So I mean, the stereotypical lines are mostly lies, and that's why they're bad. They're bad because they're not true, and that's why you shouldn't discriminate. But what happens if you have a conflict with somebody who's discriminating?
Wait, I don't think that discrimination is bad just because something's like untrue. I think that discrimination is bad because it denies people equal opportunity.
Yeah, but what's the motivation to discriminate to begin with?
Typically feelings.
Typically feelings. Usually preconceived notions that are untrue, correct?
Snowflakery.
Like, for instance, if somebody said, I don't want to hire Mexicans because I think that they're lazy. That would be a stereotype that's not true, correct?
That would be a stereotype that's not true. That is correct.
Right. And that's most of the reason that we have discriminatory practices, right?
Because of what?
Because of stereotypes. Stereotypes are what leads most often to discriminatory practices.
In I guess typically yes, but I don't think that like just because something is true or untrue is like what's harmful inherently about discrimination. I think that what's inherently harmful about discrimination is the denying of equal opportunity.
I'm not asking you what's harmful, I'm asking you the motivation.
But wait, I care about the harms. I'm a consequentialist.
Yeah, but I care about the motive. That's nice. I care about the harms too, but the motivation is what leads to the harms. So you're kind of putting the cart before the horse.
I don't think that like lies are necessarily what leads to the harms.
Really? So you don't think that it's basically the reason that most people would discriminate is based along preconceived notions that likely aren't true? Isn't that the primary reason for discrimination?
That's typically how discrimination
happens. It lies. That's what I'm saying. So if you're in a situation where where you know something is true, know it's true, and you're forced to lie, right? You're saying you shouldn't be able to discriminate. So this is your
let me give an example. Like something can be a stereotype that can be true, and it can still be harmful to discriminate along those lines. For example,
give me an example.
It is true that black people commit crime more on average than white people. There are systemic reasons why this happens. But if you were to discriminate against like black people because you just think like they're more likely to be criminals, that's based off of something that is true, but it's still harmful to discriminate there. The harm isn't in whether or not something's true or false. The harm is in denying people equal opportunity.
Yeah, the problem is that there's a lot of nuance within the confines of that statement, especially when it comes to higher criminality by other perceived races. For instance, you don't believe in race, right, Neil?
I think that race is real.
You think that race is real?
At least as real as any other political construct.
That's not what I asked you. Is biological race real?
Is like skin color real?
No, that's not what I asked you. I asked you if biological race is real.
What do you mean by biological race?
I mean, can you taxonomically categorize people biologically along racial lines?
To some extent.
Well, what does that mean? Like I said, the gift is in the nuance, Naomi.
So I think that like the political category of race that we've constructed is not like strictly based off of like biological features. I think it has much more to do with lineage, which is not like cleanly delineated biologically.
What do you mean? What does that even mean? That doesn't mean anything.
Like,
what are you talking
what is
about?
race as a political
I'm
category?
asking about the biological taxonomical categorization of race. Is it true or false? Can you categorize people along racial lines or not?
There are certainly lots of different categorizations of race, and not all of them are strictly biological.
That's again.
That's why I say to an extent.
You go out of your way.
These things are more nuanced than just like blanket answering yes.
Well, you don't need a blanket answer.
You're asking for a blanket answer. When I try to provide a nuanced answer, you reject it. You want me to give you a blanket answer, which I'm not going to do.
This has to be rejected because this is a yes or no. Can you taxonomically identify races biologically? Are there?
My answer is to an extent, because it's more nuanced than a blanket yes or no.
Okay, so it's nuanced. Can a person change their race?
I don't believe so.
Why not?
Because race is a political category defined by lineage, and you can't change your lineage.
Then why did you just say it's more nuanced than that, Naomi?
What do you mean?
How else can I say it? Why did you just go out of your way to say it's more nuanced, that you can't say that race is a biological imperative, whether it's a more nuanced appeal? Right? Okay, fair enough. It's a more nuanced appeal. But then when I ask you to elaborate on this, you can't. I'm like, look, can you change your race or can't you? And
I did elaborate, and I said you can't change your race.
I can't because it's a political thing. But you said that there's a biological aspect to it. Can you change the biological aspect of it?
What are specifically biological traits you're referring to when you're referring to like biological race?
I'm asking you. That's why I asked you. What
so
the taxonomical
there are lots of ways
that
people. Well, there are lots of ways that people define race. If you're talking about race as in like certain genes that like people have based off of say like ethnic lines, which only like to an extent kind of classifies race. I mean, obviously like you can't change those genes, for example. But if you're talking about
Gotcha.
like, you know, the amount of melanin in someone's skin, well, I think we have some procedures that like can like inject people with melanin and stuff.
Perfect. This leads me right to my next portion of my argument, which is that if you cannot change your race due to the biological factors, you also cannot change your sex due to the biological
Are we
factors.
talking about sex or are we talking about gender?
Sex.
I thought this was a conversation about gender.
They're both intertwined, wouldn't you agree?
I would say they're correlated. Sure, they're certainly
They're
related,
intertwined.
but they're not the exact same thing.
I didn't say that they were, did I? But one more time, I'm going to go down this road because it's very important. If you cannot change your race, how can you change your sex? Knowing that the genetics determine both of those things.
Sex is not determined by genetics.
Wait, what? Sex isn't determined by genetics?
No.
What do you think a chromosome is, Naomi?
I think that a chromosome is something that has genes, but it's not the sole determiner of biological
something
sex.
that has genes, or it's dependent completely upon genes?
Chromosomes have genes.
What is a chromosome?
Matt Walsh's next documentary. What is a chromosome?
Like it's the piece of like your genome that has genes.
Wait, what? It's the piece of your genome that's what you think what is a chromosome? Why can't you answer that?
I did answer what a chromosome
Take a second,
is.
pull up what a chromosome is. Because you just said it's not genetic,
Wait,
which is insane.
hold up. I said that sex is not solely genetic. Chromosomes are genetic, but sex is not solely based on chromosomes.
What's sex determined on?
Would you like to know what sex is determined on?
Mhm.
So sex is multifaceted. We can break it down into lots of categories. There is a genetic component to sex, but there's also an anatomical component. There's a hormonal component. You can even
Those are all
talk about
genes.
there's a brain
Those are all
component.
genetic expressions.
Those
Every
are
one of them.
not all genes. Hormones are not the same thing as
Let me
genes.
take
And anatomy is
let
not
me
the same
take a
thing as
second.
genes.
Let me take a second to go ahead and show you why you're wrong on this. Can you see this okay, Naomi? I can go ahead and scroll in for you. This is the typical XX, you know XX generally, right, for male.
Uh-huh.
You can see
XX is generally
this,
female.
yes, but this is for an XX male.
Okay.
Okay. As you see the 46XX, you see that it kind of goes around here and goes to smaller testes, and then it goes right in line with what we would generally see with a person who did not have these XX chromosomes. Now, I'm going to show you the typical progression of an XY male. If you look at the XY male here, right? I'll scroll in again. You can see that that loop doesn't exist to bypass the bipotential gonad, but it leads to testes and goes along the exact same arc. Why does it go along that exact same arc? Because genetics determine what your sex is going to be. You only have two paths ever. There's not ever more than two paths, regardless of XY or XX or whatever chromosomes that you want to throw in. It always relies on two, period. There's only two paths ever available, and we can actually chart this out, Naomi.
So what are you saying that's like goes against anything I'm
saying? That the genes themselves are exactly what constitutes whether or not you're going to be male or female, because genetics are what constitutes the two only paths that are available for a person to go down. And there's only two.
So do you think that gene expression also has an impact on your biological sex?
Gene expression in what way?
Like the actual expression of genes, like how your DNA is like read and processed.
I just gave you a demonstration of gene expression.
Yeah, so you would agree that
difference in XY and XX in a male.
So you would agree that gene expression like impacts one's biological sex, right?
No, well, no. The pathways are only binary, and they're only ever going to be binary.
But you think that like gene expression like is what causes like these biological sex differences, right?
Gene expression can cause there to be variance within the actual sex construction itself, which are mutations, but no, there's only two paths available, period.
But like those paths are caused by
Ever.
gene expression, right?
Well, yeah, I guess you could say that they're caused by gene expression, but the
Right.
chromosomes,
And so
in
gene
which are
expression
expressed only have two paths.
Gene expression is something you can change. So when a trans person
No,
takes
it's not.
HRT, it alters
No.
the gene expression of their cells.
Like,
No,
can
no,
you,
wait, so
no.
let me explain gene expression 101.
What?
Is basically computer code. It reads in like inputs and it produces outputs. These inputs are things like hormones.
That's
so
a mass
when
oversimplification.
well, I'm trying to explain it to people. When your endocrine system is testosterone dominant, your cells read in the testosterone input, they produce these male outputs. When your endocrine system is estrogen dominant, it reads in the estrogen inputs and it produces female outputs. This is gene expression 101. If a trans person takes HRT, they alter the gene expression of their cells, and those cells begin to go down the female development pathway. I'm not saying it changes their chromosomes, it changes their gene expression. This has impacts on lots of their biological sex characteristics. I've never claimed that you can change everything about your biological sex.
You can't change your sex.
But there is lots of things you can change. Lots of biological sex characteristics you can change.
Let me ask you.
That's my claim about sex this entire time.
Well, let's see if that's true. Let's see if that's true or not. Let's assume for a second that somebody goes down the exact same pathway that you did. I'm just going to ask one slight personal question. You don't have to answer it, of course, but just for the demonstration purposes, have you taken HRT?
Yes.
Okay, good. So assuming that somebody has the exact same story that you do, however, does not color their hair purple and does not grow it out, right? Or let's just say that they do, in fact, do this, okay? But they say that they're not a woman. Would you classify them as one?
As a woman? Are we talking about woman or are we talking about female?
Would you classify them as a woman?
So woman is a social category. I think we would have to examine their lived social experience to classify them as a woman.
So one more time, I'm going to ask this, right? Because it's very important. If a person who had the exact same experiences that you have had and looks exactly like you do right this second, claims that they're not a woman but is a man, would you say that they're a man or a woman?
I think that their lived social experience would be that of a woman, yet their gender identity could perhaps be that of a man.
What would you call them?
If I believe that they are sincere in their gender identity, I would refer to them based on their gender identity, because that's how I think we ought to treat people.
So it doesn't matter if they look exactly like you, have the same experiences that you do. Everything can be all equal across the board, and you still wouldn't consider them a woman if they didn't want to be considered a woman, which is why your definition of woman is regressive, because it's just anybody who identifies as one. There is no delineation point. There is no delineation point.
Hold up. That's not...
Boom. Completely owned. Great point by Andrew right there. Yes, absolutely true. That's an excellent point. That's an excellent point. If they had the exact same experiences as Naomi, went through the exact same treatment, did everything, but at the end of the day said, I'm a man and I just want to look like a woman. And my preferred pronouns are, man or he, him. My preferred pronouns are he, him. This person, Naomi, can't even answer it. They would just say, well, like, what a mind screw. So yes, to Andrew's point, it is just all about your gender expression, just all about the feelings, just what they want to be identified as, which proves that all of this is just absolute nonsense. And by the way, an argument that would have been great to use in here would have been if, they say, well, you have to lie to these groups, you have to lie to transgenders or else they're going to unalive themselves. I would say, okay, great. You should also lie to Christians because, atheists and all these people, they don't think God exists. They don't think God is real. So what if we were to just force people and say, well, no, you better affirm my belief that there is a God, or else maybe HR could take this up with you because you're not affirming my beliefs. But we have that all the time. We have atheists and all these other religions and stuff saying that, no, but we have atheists out here and secular humanists and stuff saying that, our God isn't real. It doesn't exist. Well, by your logic, we should just force them to lie to us and affirm us or else. But they're just lucky that under the teachings of Jesus Christ. But they're just lucky that under the teachings of Christianity, it is a sin to unalive oneself. So I think that's where they lucked out on. But if it wasn't, oh, you better best believe. But what did you guys think about this? How did you guys think Andrew Wilson did here against this nominal Naomi? You can see the whole debate down below. I have a link in the description. Subscribe to my channel if you really enjoyed this. And if you like seeing Andrew Wilson debates, I have a whole playlist for you on the screen, along with a bunch more content, a bunch more debates that I think you'll enjoy.